and Wood Mackenzie an opportunity to present on this webinar. Let me start with a very positive note here. 2000 was a phenomenal year for the LNG industry. In 2017 and 18, LNG trade grew by around 10%, whereas if you look 2019, it grew at a record 13+%, with LNG trade volumes crossing 350 million tons. A key notable point, though, to note was that a lot of this growth actually came from the European region instead of Asia, which was historically the key driver. And one of the key reasons for this was Europe almost acted like as a balancing region to absorb the current oversupply that exists in the LNG market. On the same side, we also saw 70+ million tons of liquefaction capacity taking FID, which does indicate that even though prices have gone down, longer term prices are in a range where both sellers and financiers are comfortable to take FID on liquefaction projects. In fact, after 70+ million ton taking FID in 2019, 2020 was actually expected to be another record year because a number of projects like the Qatar expansion, the Mozambique project by ExxonMobil, a few projects in US Gulf Coast were actually looking to take FID. However, COVID struck at the start of 2020, and it has brought a turbulent dynamics to the LNG industry. While on one hand, lower oil prices and lower LNG prices have significantly impacted the financials of LNG suppliers and project developers. On the other hand, buyers haven't been able to take a complete advantage of this softer LNG pricing situation. The key reason being that lockdowns have been imposed in various LNG buyer countries to reduce the impact of the virus. And this has meant that gas demand, especially in the industrial and the transport sector, has been significantly impacted. If we look what happens from this point going forward, then I think that there are various dynamics to consider. First is the one relating to lockdowns. As I said, it did impact industrial and transportation sector demand, but as economies have started to open and industrial activity as well as economic activity is recovering in various markets, obviously we will see that demand coming up again. Whether it reaches the pre-COVID levels again is a tough question to answer because we need to consider what impact this lockdown period is really going to have on the various economies and how much activity is really going to come back once those lockdowns are lifted. The other aspect to consider is the lower oil prices. And that brings some key dynamics out here. On one end, oil to gas switching may become difficult because the delta between petroleum product prices and LNG prices has narrowed now. And this means that if I'm a power plant or an industrial player who needs to make investment to change my turbines or equipments to start accepting LNG instead of oil, then because of this low delta, the payback period either appears very high or it may not appear reasonable. So this environment does create an impact for oil to gas switching, and some LNG demand growth may get deferred because of that. However, on the other hand, because LNG prices are extremely low at this point in time, which is almost $2 to $2.50 per MMBTU on a spot basis and lower than $5 per MMBTU on a long-term basis, coal to gas switching could actually take place in North Asian countries as well as in some of the price sensitive markets like India, where we've actually seen that happening. This is because when you adjust the efficiencies of the coal and the LNG fired generations and take the existing coal and LNG prices, in some cases you could find that LNG fired power generation appears competitive, and that means that it could actually replace some of the coal based power generation that is happening. So these are really the dynamics to watch out for as we go forward from here. how much of that oil to gas switching really gets delayed because the delta has gone lower, but at the same time, how much incremental coal to gas switching can actually happen in some of the Asian countries, given LNG prices have gone down significantly. So that's the demand side of the story. The other aspect to then consider is what happens on the supply side. If we look at the immediate impact on supply, which is almost impact in quarter two of 2020, then because of the lockdowns imposed, there were restrictions on movement of people and restrictions on movement of equipments, resources, etc. This meant that many of the liquefaction plants had to defer their defer their maintenance plans as opposed to their earlier plans, and that has resulted in increased LNG supply availability in the very immediate quarter. This is also one of the reasons why we are seeing a lot of cargo cancellations currently happening in the US, because many of you would be aware that when those long-term contracts were signed by US project developers, they did give the ability to the buyers as well as the tollers to cancel those cargoes by giving a 45-day notice and paying for the liquefaction slash the tolling charge. So many of the participants are choosing to do that right now, given this massive oversupply. And hence we are seeing a lot of US cargo cancellations happening in the very near term. In the more medium to longer term, if we have to talk about impact on supply from COVID-19, then we have to categorize it into two buckets. One is the impact on projects that have already taken FID and are under construction. And the second is projects that haven't yet taken FIDs, which we call as pre-FID. If we talk about that first bucket, then certainly we are seeing delays on many of those under construction projects. For example, if you look at the Tangguh expansion project in Indonesia, BP did announce that they had to remove thousands of construction staff from that project when lockdowns were imposed. And that has meant that there would almost be a delay of 1 year from the earlier anticipated timeline of the project commissioning. We are seeing this happening on not only in the Tangguh expansion project, but also on other projects that are being developed globally. So that's one impact. Clearly, supply from the under construction projects is getting delayed. But on the other hand, what lower oil prices is also doing is it is making project developers evaluate their economics again. Because at the prices of Brent around $40 to $45 per barrel, they need to look at the indexations that they are discussing on their contracts. What does that mean in terms of an absolute US dollar per MMBTU value? And how does that absolute US dollar per MMBTU value compare to their own break-even cost? Because if they see that they aren't in a position to recover their break-even cost, then it may be difficult for them to get financing and get financial investors on board. So that's the second impact that we have to consider, that what's going to happen to these pre-FID projects. Some of them have already started announcing delays, like the Mozambique project that ExxonMobil is looking to develop has announced that FID will be delayed from 2020 to at least 2021. Similarly, we did see that Qatar has gone ahead and placed the orders for their shipping fleet, but there is going to be a delay in their timelines as opposed to what was originally envisaged. So similar to the impact on demand, what COVID-19 means is that it will also have a resultant impact, resultant negative impact on annual supply availability that we see in the coming decade. In general, we feel that the most important impact is on the period during 2025 to 2027, because that was the period when a lot of this LNG capacity that took FID last year, the 70 plus million ton that I spoke about earlier, was actually going to be commissioned and was going to be ramped up. So we do see a negative impact on supply during that period. So the key question then arises is, if we look at the demand dynamics, if we look at this change supply dynamics and overlay them together, how does the supply demand balance look like? What we have done in this chart is we have overlaid the supply from operational projects, the supply from under construction projects accounting for the expected delays, and then jotted the total LNG demand forecasting. What it shows is that there is no need of new pre-FID supply prior to 2024 because the market appears to be well balanced prior to 2024 and enough supply is available to cover demand. However, there will be a need for supply from these pre-FID projects post 2024-2025. And given that LNG projects take around 4 to 5 years to get built, that means that contracts will need to get discussed over the next 1 or 2 years. Because if projects don't take FID by say 2021 or 2022, then it would mean that it would be difficult for those liquefaction projects to come up in that 2025 time frame by which the markets do need supply from these new pre-FID projects. But overall, if we look at the environment, as I said, prior to 2024, it clearly seems that there is enough supply available from the operational and the under construction projects. It looks that that supply will be enough to cover the anticipated demand. We may in fact see an oversupply situation in a lot of, especially those summer months. And that clearly means that there is a pressure right now on LNG suppliers, and the current LNG market is clearly in favor of buyers, which means that when these buyers are negotiating contracts, they have been able to negotiate better prices as well as flexible terms. The chart here just shows how LNG pricing has evolved from the start of this decade towards 2020. 2011, you will remember, was the year when the Fukushima incident happened. And because of that, a lot of LNG was actually pulled into the Japanese market. And during those times, the long-term prices for LNG contracts were as high as 14.5 to 15% of oil indexation. However, especially beginning 2014, what we have seen is that there was a period in between where demand was stagnant, especially in the key growing countries of China, India, as well as the oil prices went down significantly. This is the period between 2014 to 16, especially, that I'm talking about. And that did lead to a reduction in the oil indexation pricing levels. 2017-18 then did see strong growths, especially from China, which did consume a lot of that LNG available in the market, given clear environmental policies were written, and a lot of the industrial as well as the power plants had to shift from burning coal to LNG. So a lot of LNG got sucked in China post 2016. And by 2018, the LNG participants almost reached a view that the market would tighten in that 2022-2023 timeframe because new LNG would be required. And if projects were to take FID to underpin that demand, then contracts needed to be there to underpin the financing. That's where in 2018, we did see a jump in prices again, where oil indexation levels were around 12%. But again, what we have seen that once that 70 plus million ton has taken FID in 2019, and demand levels have now collapsed given issues with COVID-19, etc. This has meant that we are seeing a fall in LNG prices again. In fact, our understanding is that the recent contracts which are being discussed between some of the strategic buyers that Qatar has, which are especially the North Asian buyers, they are sub 11%. So they are 10.x% regions. So clearly it does show that there is a pressure on suppliers again, and pricing indexation levels have been dropping again in the last 2 years. In a nutshell, if I have to just conclude some of the key takeaways that I mentioned just now. One, we expect that supply from projects that have already taken FID will be able to meet anticipated demand until at least 2024 or 2025. It means that new pre-FID supply is only required beyond that period. And because there is an oversupply or a well-balanced market, at least over the next 3 to 4 years, there is a pressure on sellers. The environment clearly seems to be in favor of buyers, which is clearly reflected in the pricing indexations, which have dropped significantly, as well as from the flexible terms that many of the buyers have been able to get from the suppliers when they have entered into LNG SPAs. So I think that's all that I have from my side. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has.
Some questions are coming in this message form.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I see a question here on renewables impacting LNG demand. I think a very good question. So when you saw those forecasts that I just showed earlier, which was our forecast around LNG demand, we do take the impact of renewables into account because we do appreciate that renewables will be competing against LNG based power generation, especially in the longer term. But in the more medium term, it is our view that it's not going to be so easy to create a massive scale of renewable generation capacity that can meet all the demand growth that we are anticipating. And given that coal-based financing is getting extremely challenging in most of the Asian countries now, given a lot of investors as well as financial institutions are walking away from coal, that will mean that it will be essential for countries to develop gas-based power generation capacity in the next decade, not only to meet.
Okay, I can start, right? Hi, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Kamrujaman from Bangladesh, and I'm going to give you a brief picture of LNG infrastructure and future prospect in Bangladesh. Before I start, I must tell something. Below my picture, the RPGCL logo is showing. So to be confirmed that I am not no more in RPGCL, I have been retired from there. So I'm free now. I'm not representing RPGCL. Okay. Though I have worked there in Petrobangla for 40 years. Bangladesh enters into the LNG era in the middle of 2018, just 2 years ago. First LNG cargo received in April 2018. This first cargo was carried by the regasification terminal, that is FSRU itself, when it come to the site for permanently moved near Cox's Bazar. Few months after commissioning of the first FSRU and successfully deliver LNG at the rate of 400 to 500 million cubic feet per day, the second FSRU commissioned within the 1 kilometer of the first one. Now the total storage capacity of these two FSRU is 276,000 cubic meter and can regasify more than 1,000 million cubic feet per day. What does it mean? That means Bangladesh has now the capable of importing 7.5 million ton of LNG every year. But in fact, Bangladesh is importing only 4 million tons of LNG. That is average 67 numbers of cargo per year. Initially, because there was some limitations in the transmission and distribution networks. By now, that limitation has been overcome, and Petrobangla is trying to utilize full capacity of the infrastructure. But by this time, pandemic situations came. Due to that situation, demand has been reduced by approximately 20%. Petrobangla is adjusting the situation by reducing local production, keeping the LNG import remain same, and taking advantage of brand-based LNG price. LNG price now reduced to 1/3 of its original price, Bangladesh contract. Due to this situation and reasons, LNG import will remain same for several months, depending upon the pandemic. Bangladesh have got a very good transmission and distribution network. So we have the flexibility of distribution gas, whether it is imported or it is indigenous. Now let's see the demand projection 10 years and 20 years from now. As my slide is not visible, so just I am discussing without that slides. At this moment, Bangladesh is demand and supplying only the 3,300 million cubic feet of gas per day. But after 10 years from now, in 2013, it will goes to 4,700 million. And by the year 2041, it will goes up to 5,900. Let's see the 2030 year situation. In that year, the total demand will be 4,700 million cubic feet, and local production will be only 1,800 million. So the rest, about 2,500 million gas will be shortfall. How it will come? There is a few options are there. Number one options is that increasing the local production of the gas fields by applying new technology and latest technology. But it will not go beyond 1,800 million cubic feet per day, what is expected by Petrobangla. So it will remain 1,800, not more than that. Second option is vigorous exploration in the offshore. Petrobangla is going to have multi-client survey, and after that they will go for exploration, bidding for exploration. Already few blocks are working under PSC, but that will take time to have gas. And it has been expected that within the year 2030, there will be no gas from offshore. So the third option is cross-country gas importation through pipeline. Initiative has been taken, but not much amount will be expected from this option. We can expect only 400 million cubic feet per day from this option. Now this rest amount of 2,500 million cubic feet of gas, which is equivalent to about 19 million ton of LNG. How it will come? Only 4 ton is now importing. So the rest 15 million ton, only option is to import LNG. So the existing floating terminal as well as land-based LNG terminal, which is scheduled to be completed by 2026. Some challenges are there. Number one is Brent price volatility. This can be reduced by applying hybrid formula, some volume of spot purchase, maybe renegotiation. Extreme weather conditions for FSRU, that is also a challenge. Efficient scheduling may be the solution for this. Uncertainty in consumer demand, that can be reduced by adjusting the local production. Another one challenge is very much that is the indigenous price of gas. Even after the fall of oil price, the imported LNG price is 3 times higher than the local gas price. The government is gradually increasing the price, but it will take time. Another problem for the importation of LNG is the low draft near the coastal area offshore. Small scale LNG may be the solution in these cases. And the last one is the COVID-19 situation. We don't know, future can be told. Future will tell what will happen. So this is from now, from me. If anybody in any yes.
Okay, great. Hi everybody, and hi fellow panelists. What's interesting to listen to you guys. So now we return our attention to Myanmar, which has had LNG ambitions for some time. These are the introduction slides about my firm. I'm a lawyer there. Philippe Loy has about 100 lawyers and consultants there in Myanmar. Personally, I do mostly energy work such as hydropower, solar power, and gas to power, LNG to power, including some of these present LNG projects. Milang Jaik, for example, which is a 1,319 megawatt project. Total Siemens, of which we don't hear so much right now anymore, which was a Kambok, was a 1,200 megawatt LNG to power. And V-Power and CNTIC. I will come to that in a second. I thought that maybe the best way to give you introduction is to show you this map of present pending projects that we have in Myanmar, and I've indicated which ones are hydro, which one is gas, which one is solar. There's even some coal so that you can see that. And they're really in 4 big groups. You see their international PPAs signed in 2016. Yeah, so these were signed a good 4 years ago. Many of these projects are actually, Myanmar, you see Myanmar is in COD, but in Taketa, 106 megawatt has had COD. The top one, Kambak, 200 megawatt, did not have COD yet. Then you see one in Mandalay for 300 megawatt, that's a solar project, no COD. And then finally, Minbu has had COD over 170 megawatt. By way of context, the whole of Myanmar presently, in terms of generation, has somewhere around 3,500 megawatt of generation. About half of that is hydro, but most of the hydro is in the north of the country where nobody lives, and all the people are in the south of the country. So, and we have, you know, a very poor transmission network. So a lot of that generation actually goes lost. The government has given approval, which they call like an NTP, which is kind of an informal approval, but in writing for a large 1,230 megawatt LNG to power project at Kambak by Total and Siemens. But that has not started construction. I work on that project, so I cannot really say a lot about it, but I think it's fair to say that it has been a little bit quiet about that. Then you see Milongjaik, 1,390 megawatt. That is a local company together with a Chinese state-owned enterprise. There has been some changes in the consortium there, but that project is going ahead in a sense that those PPA negotiations are actually progressing. So that project seems to be moving forward. I'm also working on that one, so I cannot really tell you, you know, all of the detail. You see another little red dot there in the group other major projects. There's another red one, which is gas. That's also an LNG project by Energize Myanmar. But it's been a little bit quiet about that, so we don't hear much about it. The big news in LNG is undoubtedly the projects that were tendered last year. These were advertised as short-term emergency power rental projects on a basis of LNG to power. They were tendered out competitively, and all 3 of them were won by the same company, V-Power from Hong Kong, who has brought in CNTIC as a consortium partner to implement these projects. And that is 900 megawatt in total, spread out over 3 different sites over the country, one in the north, Rakhine, one in and 2 in Yangon. So I'm also working on those projects. The PPAs have been signed. COD for one of those sites has been achieved. And production is around 400 megawatt there, and that is the one in Rakhine. And importation of LNG has started very recently. I think COD was 14th of June, if I'm not mistaken, and LNG imports have started in May. So there've been 2 shipments so far. Both have come from Petronas. Petronas has signed a deal with the V-Power and CNTIC consortium for the long-term supply of LNG. And the sole off-taker is the state utility, the EPGE, yeah, Electric Power Generation Enterprise. Electric Power Generation Enterprise pays a tariff that includes basically everything. That includes the fuel, the LNG, that includes the generation, that includes the payment for any infrastructure that the company has put in place. There's been a lot of rumors in Myanmar for years now about other LNG projects, additional LNG projects. Yeah, the press in Myanmar has reported about a potential project by Marubeni and Sumitomo Corporation for an LNG project of 1,250 megawatt at Tilawa. We do not have any official information about that, so I cannot confirm to this audience at what stage that is, if at all. There's also been earlier rumors and talks involving Sojitz, involving Shell, involving Petronas itself. We've had quite some active things, but what has started to implement or what has had an official approval so far publicly, that is on your screen right now. Yeah. Okay, let's just, I realize I don't have so much time, but I just wanted to show this slide to show you how complex the approval system is for an LNG to power project in Myanmar. You will need to obtain top-level approvals from the cabinet and the state councillor, and this may take a while. And your PPA negotiations, the time that it takes between agreeing the PPA and actually obtaining the final cabinet approval may be so long that the government counterpart do not want you to wait for this. In other words, as we have seen in a recent tender for 1 gigawatt of solar projects in Myanmar, which is presently the proposals for which are due within 3 weeks, by the way, on the 17th of July. We have seen that the EPGE has said, look, for these projects, you need to start construction as soon as you are awarded without PPA. And we hope we can get the PPA signed for you by the time you go into COD. Yeah. So that is a little bit challenging. And part of the reason why that is the case is what you see on your slide now. That is that the time that it takes to get approval from these different bodies who are poorly coordinated, that eats up into the time that you actually need for construction. And so the government says, look, we don't have time for that. Everything needs to be urgent. We want you to have COD within 6 months in case of the solar project. Yeah. So we're not going to be able to wait for all the permits and all the approvals. Yeah, so that makes Myanmar a little bit challenging country to work with, particularly if you need to rely on traditional project financing. Yeah. Okay, I wanted to discuss with you what kind of structures for LNG to power are possible in Myanmar. And one thing that's good about Myanmar is that actually, in terms of foreign ownership restrictions, there are none with respect to this sector. A power company can be 100%, a power generation company can be 100% foreign owned. Transmission line, a BUT company can be 100% foreign owned. A gas management company, a regasification company can be 100% foreign owned. My clients always start discussing the structure with me, whether it's possible to do the simplest as possible, which is just one power company that also holds the gas facility, yeah, and that purchases LNG or gas from its supplier and then sells electricity to the EPGE, as simple as possible, right? But somehow we never end up actually doing this structure. Somehow we always end up doing this structure on the next slide, where we have a separate gas company that owns the terminals, that owns the gas facilities, yeah? And that separate gas company is actually then providing a regasification service to the power co or to the LNG supplier, doesn't really matter that much. And why do we end up with this? Well, mostly not for any Myanmar reasons, because in Myanmar you can do an integrated structure. It's actually better in Myanmar for tax purposes if you do an integrated structure. But I notice in practice that you know, there are different stakeholders involved. There are different strategic consortiums involved, and sometimes the expectation is that the gas facilities will also be used for something else. For example, one of my clients wanted to import LNG and re-export some of that, or a lot of that, to another country. Yeah, to Thailand or to China. Yeah, and then of course the picture changes. Then I think you will have to have a separate gas management company, separate from the power generation company. There's also some notable tax differences there, but it's both are possible. I just wanted to jump ahead to one. You see also on the slide that is going to be a problem is the vessel itself. The FSRU is actually treated as a port under Myanmar law because it is a place where actually goods arrive from overseas. So it needs to be, from a regulatory perspective, it's a port, and this is complicated because it is also a vessel, and vessels that quasi-permanently remain within the waters of Myanmar, they must have a Myanmar flag, and they can only have a Myanmar flag if they are Myanmar owned. And that's of course not possible with an FSRU. So this is one of the regulatory hurdles that we have resolved in the past by with special agreements to be signed with the Myanmar Port Authority and with the Ship Registration Department, allowing us to bring in those vessels on a charter basis. Yeah, and that is an exception that exists in the legislation. The regulation is not well adjusted, but at least you know, there is a legal basis for this. Yeah. What you cannot do is the LNG supplier itself cannot also do the regasification in Myanmar. The LNG supplier cannot hold the facilities that actually carry out the regasification. Because then it will become subject to, it will require a subsidiary or a branch in Myanmar. So you cannot really do that as a non-resident. You will have to set up in Myanmar as a company or as a branch. And I suspect that might be similar in other countries as well. What is the PPA that you're going to get in Myanmar? Just very briefly. I think you are going to get a tariff that is denominated in US dollar, but that the government will pay in Myanmar Chat. Yeah, so you are protected from devaluation because your tariff is in US dollar. So you are protected from devaluation of the Myanmar Chat. But you are not really protected from the lack of US dollar, should there be any. Yeah. Now, I have to say that if once you get paid in Myanmar, any Myanmar company, including a foreign-owned company, has the right to open a US dollar bank account. We have 13 foreign banks now in Myanmar. So you have banks from Singapore, from Japan, from Malaysia, from Thailand, from India, you name it. Yeah. So you would be allowed to convert your Myanmar Chat that you receive from the government for your electricity. You would be allowed to convert that into US dollar immediately. Yeah. And then you are allowed to send that overseas if you had central bank permission at the outset of your project to do that, which normally you will get. So not such a big deal, but some clients, they do worry, justifiably I suppose, about the possible lack of convertibility. They say, well, what if there's no US dollars available? What about the availability of the US dollars? Yeah, if you're talking about 900 megawatt and it's not the, you know, it's not the, you see projects of 1.5 gigs in LNG to power. What if they run out of US dollar to change? Yeah, that may be a problem because it is quite difficult, and it might not be possible to actually get a sovereign guarantee in Myanmar at the present status of the policy. They have laws for it, they have regulation for it, but they haven't given any to anyone, basically. Yeah, they've given a very rudimentary one on a smaller gas to power project that also was very late, and that became, you know, a bit of a disaster. So we do not have a good track record so far about robust sovereign guarantees. If you compare with Pakistan or compare with, Vietnam or Indonesia, 10, 15 years ago, we do not have any of that right now. So that's a bit, so in terms of also direct agreements, the contractual structure is not as robust as in other countries, and some clients will consider that this is a bit of this might be a risk in case something goes wrong. I have some more details about the PPA in the slide, but I don't want to eat up the time of my fellow panelists. So anybody who would like the slides, just drop me an email. I'll put my email address. I'll put it in the chat function. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Edwin. I've got two questions to you. The first one is from Rick Lai, who said that, do you know if the MPA allows a V-Power FSU to be moored at the Jakarta site? This is the first one. The second is from James O'Brien, and he asked that, could you explain a bit about the LNG import process in Myanmar? Is EPGE the only authorized company to import? Do you see more supply contracts being signed by EPGE? These are the two questions to you.
Yeah, okay, I'll take the second one first, about the import of LNG. So the EPGE is not the importer of LNG. In the past, so the first imports right now, which are really the first LNG imports that we've ever had in May and in June, they are actually done by the generator, yeah. So by the company that generates the power, and as a matter of fact, our firm, helps them get the import licenses for that. So as soon as you have actually in your investment license specification the right that you will be importing LNG, then you only need, regularly updated import licenses to actually comply with that. In terms of statute, legally speaking, the MOGE and probably also the MEP, they have the right to import LNG as well, but they have not done that so far. And so the oil and gas enterprise of Myanmar, the MOGE, who a few years ago tried to play an important role in terms of LNG to power, has really not, that role has been abandoned a little bit. And we have not seen the MOGE play a role in that. And the EPG's position is kind of, look, I'm buying electricity from you. I don't want to be bothered with anything of the rest. Yeah, I know you need to import LNG. That's fine with me, but I don't really want to be involved with that. Which, of course, in the PPA leads to quite a negotiation about deviation payments and take or pay commitments that the generator needs to take towards his LNG supplier. So that was not easy to try and agree. Okay, then the second question about the MPA, yeah. So the MPA is the authority, yeah. There's a specific question here about whether the FSU can be moored at the Taketa site. I'd rather not answer this specifically because I'm working on the project and I don't want anybody to say that I'm divulging confidential information. But I will tell you this: the MPA has the authority has the regulatory oversight over all ports and port limits in Myanmar, and an FSRU would be regarded as a port. So what the MPA does typically for these sites, I've had that before, not only in V-Power's project, then they will look at where will be more the positioning, navigational issues, yeah, the ingress and the exits, and you come up with what should probably be a some kind of a memorandum of agreement with the MPA. You know, setting out exactly what you are allowed to do and when you're allowed to do this. So the MPA has that authority. They also have the authority to charge a fee. Yeah. So yeah, that is also something that you will need to agree with the MPA and probably write in that same agreement. At least that's how we did it. Okay, there's another question. Yeah, the solution for credit risk enhancement for lack of availability in US dollar. Yeah. Do you recommend IPPs to work as trading companies? You know, I'm not the right person to answer. I'm not a financial specialist. I'm not a financial advisor. But my clients do tend to tell me that these are typically, that these exchange rate aspects are long-term, you know, are short-term problems. And a PPA is a long-term contract. So if you have a problem during a few years, over 20 years, you may have a, you know, the problem will look very differently, because when there are different, you know, currency relationships, they will also auto-balance each other. So I can't really tell you that. You can't really hedge the Myanmar Chat right now. What maybe you could do to some extent, it's still quite limited, you could get Myanmar Chat financing in Myanmar to some degree, you know, but the banks there, they don't cooperate. They don't have a lot of precedent in cooperating with each other, the local banks that have a lot of Myanmar Chat. If you need to get together, maybe $50, I think it's possible. But if you're talking about $1 billion project, it's just not not going to be a big difference. Yeah? Okay, a lot of questions here. A question about importation from James. Sounds more like a privatized importation project. Direct with the generator. Does Edwin have a view on any more LNG import terminals appearing? Yes, so it is a private affair. Now, you will just get a LNG import license. You need a terminal that will be licensed and that will be inspected and blah, blah, blah. But they're not doing, they're not being difficult about that anymore. So if you want to open a port terminal for fuel, for LNG, you can do so. And that can also be 100% foreign owned nowadays. You do not need a local partner for that. You could do, you could lease the site and just pay the landowner for using the site and just run the project by yourself. So that is possible. See, Wilson has a question about the trend and the type of PPA that V-Power is signing for other IPPs. Yeah, it's a very good question. So I can see, I've been doing PPAs now with EPG for, well, this is my 9th year. And I can tell you that they're actually getting stricter and stricter. They're not, so they are moving towards their own benefit more and more, yeah. Some issues, they're okay with international standards, such as the concept of force majeure and foreign arbitration, you know, and those are important things. And there, EPG has no problem and sticks with, you know, international standards. But other things, not so much. For example, in capacity payments and termination payments, I see them moving away more towards energy payments and more towards less than completely bankable termination payments. Yeah, I think you may still get capacity payments for combined cycle, for gas to power, but capacity payments for hydro and for solar, that's not my experience anymore. Yeah, and about 2 years ago, we were discussing PPAs with capacity payments for hydropower. Now we're not discussing that anymore. Yeah, so that is, perhaps not such a good development. Okay, goes a little bit quick. Do PPAs have a minimum offtake guarantee? Yeah, so in one way or another, almost all PPAs have some kind of minimum offtake. Yeah, they don't expect you to take the dispatch risk, but they will either do this through capacity payments, or they will do it through a minimum offtake, a guaranteed offtake, which is then always compensated whether it's whether it has been delivered energy or not. Yeah, so most of them have that in one way or another. Then yeah, so payments linked to US dollar. I think actually that so far in most cases the payments are still in US dollar. That is to say, the tariff is nominated in US dollar, but the payment may be in Myanmar Chat, which you will then have to convert or something. Yeah. Okay, the question about the financing on the debt service reserve account. Yeah, so we tried to do DSRAs in the past with foreign bank accounts, in Singapore, and the central bank is now in Myanmar really not much in favor anymore of that. So it's difficult to do this, but since we now have like 13 and soon a few more, yeah, 15 to 17 foreign banks in Myanmar, maybe we can do a DSRA in Myanmar with a foreign bank. Yeah. Okay, next question. The FSRU must be 100% Myanmar owned. Yeah, so it doesn't have to. Yeah, a vessel in Myanmar that stays in Myanmar normally, that doesn't come to drop something off, that actually must have a Myanmar flag under local shipping regulations. And to get a Myanmar flag, it must be Myanmar owned. Yeah, but we have an exception to that because there is another system of chartering regulations, and that is what we are using for FSUs and for FSRUs. Okay, I think those are the next question that I see is for the distinguished panelists from Bangladesh. So, Kevin, I think I've exhausted my questions.
Sure. Hi, this is Ian from Delta Offshore Energy in Hanoi. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Well, I mean, I didn't prepare any slides. I kind of joined this panel quite last minute. I'm very happy to share a little bit of what's going on, at least on the ground here in Vietnam. I think the first thing is, Vietnam's been open for business for quite some time. They've handled the COVID situation relatively well. They were quite decisive early, shutting out flights into high-risk countries, as well as being very decisive with those that were coming in and quarantining and monitoring. The system here is quite efficient in that regard. And so Vietnam's been open up for business for well over a month. I mean, it's quite almost near normal. Domestic flights are full between Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. From even going out to bars, restaurants, and nightclubs, those are also wide open as it stands currently. So I would also add, like, the situation on the ground here is that the government is very active, and fortunately for us, we've got a presence here in Hanoi as well as Ho Chi Minh City, and are able to execute. Also, our local consultants here have been able to, with boots on the ground, start acting on behalf of the entire consortium So we've contracted with the with the various institutes and engineering consulting firms locally to help start collecting data, do survey work for the meta-ocean, topography, geotechnicals, etc. We've also just completed our interconnection report, which we've submitted to the government, and are now socializing that. Just met with Electricity Vietnam this morning, yesterday with the Electricity Renewable Energy Agency of MIT yesterday, and we'll start to kind of make our rounds consistently to get all the stakeholders aligned on our grid connection. In the meantime, all of our feasibility and environmental work is currently going, and we're running kind of webinar working groups right now between kind of US and Asia and Europe, depending on which types of calls, whether technical, legal, or otherwise. I think, you know, in terms of obviously the opportunity for Vietnam, it's very, very clear and apparent. Vietnam's, you know, demand growth has been double digit, maybe slightly lower going forward, but it's still very, very robust, given both the growing economy through the underlying demographics tailwind, but also on top of that, the industrialization and urbanization that's rapidly happening both in the north and the south. Where the biggest deficit is in the south, that's where we're positioned. We see a very significant opportunity for LNG and LNG to power. There's obviously a very positive trend in the renewable space, but that's now having congestion issues on the grid. So our project is actually being positioned as a way to get some 500 kV backbone into the grid, and also ensure some stable power coming from the south to the Ho Chi Minh City cluster on that power demand side. You know, where we are on contracting, we're still pretty early. We will be submitting a heads of terms PPA to EVN next month. We've had initial discussions. We had a discussion a little bit less than a month ago, last month in Backliu with the National Steering Committee, MYT, MPI, EVN, your typical energy stakeholders, to discuss our project. And the agreement was, you know, in order for us to get all the key offtake agreements and approvals by the end of this year, which is ambitious, you know, we need to align on certain items, and one of them is to get a heads of terms PPA in place as soon as possible. And so that's, again, what my discussion was with EVN this morning on getting that heads of terms PPA in play. That's being drafted off of a previously banked thermal project, which has been converted to LNG, and then working that around with all of our strategic partners. We're obviously working with GE from the very beginning, but we also have Bechtel from the US who joined us very recently, but we've been working together for quite some time, as well as Stena on the technology for the maritime offshore side, as well as shipping, and then on top of that, bring on McDermott for the offshore EPCI and pipeline. So that allows us to have a pretty strong position in terms of moving forward on the engineering front with the local consultants, and actually getting ahead of curve on certain areas. We're still starting to ramp up. We've just been starting to hire and build on the ground here as well. And I think, you know, the future right now in this transition for Vietnam, you know, they're positioning a very big energy transition. Resolution number 55 by the party came out earlier this year. And really there's a big emphasis, you know, on renewables and clean energy, with LNG being a big facet of that, given that coal hasn't really worked out as planned over the last 10 years. And so moving forward, there's only so many real viable projects that'll happen. Of course, you've seen plenty of announcements in Vietnam. We were probably the trendsetter. We were the first one to kind of position, you know, LNG to power, and also floating LNG to power. We're the only licensed project in floating LNG to power at the moment that really is making any significant headway, and we hope to be starting construction by the end of next year, and are in the process right now actually of interviewing international counsel and financial advisors. So quite a bit going on. Vietnam is obviously in a great position given its one, obviously the economic, you know, the underlying economic base that's been there prior to COVID. Two, COVID not really being a major impact right now, given the fact that they were quite decisive. Three, obviously the one-party system here making the ability for Vietnam to strategically align through the party line a comprehensive strategy where using our project as a pilot to understand how LNG to power works and therefore build off of that. And then 4 would be obviously the future industrial and modernization of the economy here. Where we are positioned in the Mekong Delta is more or less to provide a reliable power base for that region, which has been underserved significantly. The Prime Minister has a sweet spot there. When I first met with him was presenting actually in the Mekong Delta in Kanta about developing that part of the region for sustainability and climate resilience. But really it was, it's a place that has 20 million people, underserved for power and therefore underdeveloped in various industries, and with our power as a base allows that region to develop industry. For example, in particular, the strengths in agriculture and aquaculture. They'll need a modern, they can go into modern farming, modern aquaculture technologies, as well as in the value chain of storage and the cold chain of on transport, which then allows the farmers to get a leg up on the traders that usually are taking advantage of the seasonality. And so with that, I think